Are we hot?
Yep, we're hot.
Mics are hot.
We're gonna wait
Do it
for
live.
All right, so we're back with another episode of Fat, Dumb, and Angry with Nick Sabansky. Your life has been changed by knowing this kid?
I would say so.
Drastically so. I'm going to turn it right over to you, Nick. What do we got to talk about this week?
Well, kind of wanted to get his opinion on, where this country's going. How these people are going to grow up and how we're going to interact with them.
You've done it again. These people. We all love to be called that.
Yeah. From when you and me grew up, being around the same age. I mean, what are the kind of some of the big things you've noticed, big differences between them and us in a way of, what they're maybe exposed to, if it's maybe earlier, later, because one thing definitely with kids these days, I would want to discuss is the internet, kind of the effects of that on dating, because I feel like dating with kids these days, not these gays, has to be very different than it was back in our time,
All right, well, thank you for the implication that I'm an expert on dating children. So I appreciate.
Well, I don't mean it that way, but
so thanks. So biggest difference, I would say. Well, here's at least how I look at it. Is I have been cussed out by a kindergartner before.
Oh my God.
There are kindergartners my age who would have done the same thing. I think a lot of just because my different perspective might be skewed a little bit, because it's not only a difference in generation, it's also a difference in friend groups that I'm exposed to now. So we were, at least for the most part, in sort of the higher education things. So I think a lot of the things that we sort of think of as different might just be cultural differences that were there all along. As for the internet, the change in control, or the change in connectedness, I know that's like cliched to say, but you can, back when we had AIM.
I was about to say AIM. Yeah, when
back.
AIM.
All right, so let's talk about AIM here. AIM was an innovation that allowed you to talk with your friends over the phone line without talking over the phone. And for a while, it was just like one person. Well, the biggest change there is, and I think the biggest change in general is the fact that you can hold conversations with more than one person at once. When you just had a phone, you could only call one person at a time. You could only talk to one person. Your parents could kick you off. But especially now with like texting, asynchronous communication too is a big one. Mm-hmm. That you can leave messages for someone, and the amount of time it takes them to get back can affect your interpretation of that message. So I think the biggest change is sort of the instantaneousness. Not just the instantaneousness, but the complexity of the communication. Things spread more quickly. You don't have to wait for the next day to happen, for rumors to get around. And
it's very interesting too that I've seen, like it really kind of makes things a lot less personal, I mean, I noticed with myself with online dating and stuff like that. I mean, calling people, it's way more personal and it's way more like connection online. I'm doing all the stuff where I'm just messaging like 10 people at once just to get some response, So, yeah, I mean, you're really kind of losing the personal touch. And that's what I really do wonder about. I mean, as weird of a topic as it is to talk about kids dating, they all got smartphones, cell phones. They can download Grindr, Tinder, any of these kind of things that they want. So, I mean, they can be exposed to this kind of stuff of like, the streamlining of dating, I mean, we've all seen like all the stuff in the news about like Snapchat and people sending, kids sending pictures to each other and stuff like that. And you really can't control it. And I mean, one of the weird big ideas that I've had is wondering like, well, if you got two kids sending, maybe I should start calling them teens. That'd probably be a little bit more comforting.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
A little bit less, yeah.
These people sending pictures to each other. I mean, who's in trouble? I mean, can we get them both in trouble for, lewd pictures? Does only the guy get in trouble? Does the company allowing this to happen get in trouble? I mean,
well, what I'm curious about is you have something from when you're 14, 15, these kids sending each other naked images, but they never deleted off their hard drive or whatever, and now they're 20 and now they have a picture of a 15-year-old, but it's like, well, I was 15.
Yeah, well,
what happens is like residual pedophilia, because like,
can I keep my own naked pictures of myself, or well, can I get arrested for? You can't get arrested for owning your own naked pictures, can you? Or is that
I don't know.
Can that still be child porn? I
Not a
don't know.
lawyer.
I think this
Your
is
own
what
underage-
Doc Brown really was getting in trouble for.
Yeah.
Well,
When
when
he built the time machine in the first place.
Yeah.
when Roman Polanski decided to film his various Shakespearean things that involved naked children, he didn't do those in the U.S. and he got kicked out. I'm pretty sure there are other reasons for that, but having the pictures on your hard drive, it's based on when the picture was taken.
Yeah.
Not at the age it currently is, which is weird because then you would have an expiration date on child pornography.
Yeah.
But in regards
The milk sours, baby. What?
You always gotta have a catchphrase for everything. Yeah.
oh boy.
Well, I mean, also, let me think about when I was a kid, you know, and like the music videos and stuff that I was exposed to, you know. Dear God, if I was a kid and I saw, you know, the music videos going on today, first off, I'd probably be an ass man by now, you know, because there's way more. For some reason, we decided, by the way, as long as we don't show the brown star, it's perfectly fine to show everything else, you know. And I could imagine being a kid this day, man. I would be watching, you know, like MTV all the time just for sexual material, you know. There's no, and that's something I'm worried about too. About once we lose our imagination and jacking off, you know, when are we going to lose just interest in reality in general? You know,
I think we're already there.
you think so?
I think we are.
I think so.
Have you ever seen tentacle porn? That's it. There's no fucking reality left. Who's
Yeah.
jacking off to that?
Well,
Like fucking, I want to meet the person who's turned on by fucking hentai tentacle porn and be like, what
Millions
is
of
wrong with you?
Japanese.
You want to
people.
look them in the eye, shake their hand, and
Maybe not shake their hand,
You're a new kind of animal, aren't you? Yeah.
shake their tentacles.
Shake that.
Well, so you know what? See, but that's I take offense to that because there are some people out there who identify as tentacle kin, and how are they supposed to have a relationship with other people if you're just gonna limit their imagination?
Wait. Tentacle
Yeah.
kin? Is this like transgender? Like I'm a guy in a girl's
You
body.
identify
What
as
if
a
you
tentacle.
identify as an octopus, but I'm stuck in a man's body? Like, what the fuck are you talking about?
Exactly what it is.
That's what it is.
Absolutely. Yeah.
identifies one single tentacle.
Well, okay, you know what? That's actually a very good question. I sure
identify as a suction cup.
there are other people who could clarify it more for you, but I imagine that there are
So,
like dual tentacles.
Can I possibly
Dual
get
tentacle
away
kin.
with saying I identify as a rapist? That's who I am.
What, like I'm a rapist stuck
Yeah, I mean-
in a priest body?
You know, you
Like, what are you
can't
talking
can't
about?
hate me for what I identify as. You know, that's not fair.
No. You have to choose something. You have to
I
choose
don't-
like
I
an
don't-
animal or something, or some sort of like.
Non-occupation.
Yeah, it can't be an occupation.
well, just
or-
to be
or a
mildly
hobby.
sobering on this topic.
Yeah.
Actually, when because I have had pedophile training,
Oh yeah.
which
Oh, we're gonna get to the next thing. too
Wait.
about
Can
it.
would you clarify
Can we get a
that
definition?
sentence?
It's not training on how to be a pedophile. It's
so Nick, were you going to cover this in a minute?
Well, I was gonna bring up the other thing that with kids. You know the. If you want to bring that up, I mean.
Well, we'll see. We'll see where you're taking that in general. But this is it, they've changed it to suspicious person training for obvious reasons.
All right.
But
now it's just you in a trench coat at the park. The training is far less formal.
yeah, it's far less formal, far less hands-on.
Thank God. Thank God.
Where were they coming up with the volunteers for this shit?
So yeah, go yeah.
So pedophilia, since you did want to talk about this, I know from your horrid talking points.
Yeah.
But it actually is a sexual preference. Like that's what we're told there, and it kind of sucks for these guys that that's what they're into, but you can't change that any more than you can change. I'll omit any sort of controversial thing here. But then on the other hand, the tentacle thing isn't necessarily a preference unto itself. It's just what's available.
Oh.
So whereas, our dads in terms of generational differences would get off to the swimsuit issue of Sports Illustrated, and we get off to a much skimpier issue of, the Sports Illustrated online.
Yeah. With
It
tentacles.
changes well, in Japan, it's illegal to show genitalia. So
Yeah.
part of what makes people interested in the tentacles is that's all that it's available. So when you kind of look at it that way, you're right. The greater exposure might be either over sexualizing, maybe desensitizing. I think that's what you were going for there.
Yeah.
Because that does change what people are looking for, what's available to them.
Well, also kind of noticed myself personally. It's like, well, I could try hard to get with a girl, because obviously what's available to me isn't going to be top quality, but like I can try to get with a girl, and the girl I can get with is going to be way less hot than a porn star. I can just jack off to porn. I mean, I don't know. At a certain point, you're like, well,
It's diminishing
or
returns.
I could be with a woman and just close my eyes the whole time. But I mean, that's
Well,
making the best of a bad
on
situation.
this end, there's actually not a TED Talk, because this would not be in a TED Talk. It's one of the it's one of the TEDx talks.
The
I watched
anti-TED Talks.
I
right here.
watched the first half of it. It was about a guy, and the title was "Why I Stopped Watching Porn." So
Illuminating, I'm sure.
Yeah.
it was one of the things he said. It brought a lot of, even though it wasn't necessarily violence, it brought a lot of violence into his fantasies, and it brought a lot of things directly to the point. So if you just want to satisfy yourself, then yes, perhaps it is easier to work with yourself, but there are other parts to it. And he says his argument was, like, before he started watching porn, and then his fantasy started going straight to the point, as it were.
Yeah.
Wait, what do you mean by that?
He means the point.
Penetration.
Uh,
Okay. So
yeah, I thought you meant
there's
points.
there's other stuff that goes into it, like, kissing. You can't kiss a well, you can, but it's
I tried.
there's elements to it that you can only get in person, and then there's also elements that are perfectly easy, perfectly accessible through images that kids like to send to each other.
Yeah, I know no kids are going to be listening. No one young is going to be listening to this. But let me tell you, if you're a 13-year-old boy right now, go out and just rape a 40-year-old guy, because there's nothing he can do to fight you in court on that. You're just going to get... Well, I mean, exactly, because he's still the pedophile. So you just got a license to, license to bone.
License to thrill.
Fun fact, that's a true story with two 12-year-olds. Crap, I should not have said, the town.
We could believe it.
Yeah. But that actually, I don't remember the specifics of it, but that did happen. There was predatory action.
Predatory 12-year-olds?
Predatory 12-year-olds, yeah. I'm not sure how the police handled it. They would definitely still charge the people, because in those cases, they are looking for... I mean, you still,
But okay, so
because
that's kind of someone down.
That's kind of the difference, is because at least in terms of being a pedophile, because a 16-year-old, at least in some states, is legal, age of consent. The 15 would have been okay in some states, and in Pennsylvania, which I know that specifically, don't ask why, is 18.
He did research for me.
No,
so
he had travel
it's not his
plans,
fault.
and he just wanted to go ahead.
Okay, now here's another thing that I would love for you to maybe explain or tell us about. Another thing in his life, and everything that he's learned. It's not he didn't seek this out. It's part of his education. But this awesome topic called child grabbing, which is something I very much enjoy. Can you teach me, how do I grab a child?
Well, I could show you demonstrations, but we're on the you couldn't hear. This is something that if you work with
gag
kids,
them first.
well, no, it's the case of they don't like to call it. Well, they've never liked to call it grabbing, but they don't like to call it restraint anymore either. They prefer to call it holds, and this is for cases where kids are out of bounds, where they're going to hurt themselves, they're going to run away. That's what it means by child grabbing. Is if for some reason, in order to protect the child, you need to grab them.
And so to clarify,
and it's actually, the training specifically is to how to do it in an appropriate way, how to do it if you've got if you're working with a
so to clarify, you work with children as, I don't know, like a camp counselor type situation, but I don't want to get into specifics, but the point is he's not randomly going up to children on the sidewalk and being taught how to grab them.
Yeah, I suppose this
you're
is
working he works with children and he's trying to keep them safe. That's why we're talking about this.
I suppose that is important context to have.
That is good
very
context
important.
to have. So yeah, what's the difference between?
And another question,
yeah.
Do you have to, is there a certain amount of moves that all of a sudden become void as soon as they start growing breasts?
No, actually, they're designed specifically to avoid, and counselors often, when they're trying to explain to children, not to touch inappropriate areas, the terms they use are anywhere that's covered by a bathing suit, you shouldn't be touching, and no matter what the age are, the moves, the various holds are designed to avoid touching. In fact, very specifically designed to avoid touching any areas that might be suspect.
Right.
So a lot of arm locations, a lot of arm like bars or grabs where your hands are actually on their sides. A lot of them, your hands are specifically designed, and they're like actually made by like martial arts people to keep your hands in a very safe place for you and the child.
It's protecting you and then the child.
Yeah, it's protecting you from liability.
Yeah.
That's a big part of it, because as you there's a lot of suspicion that goes around. I've heard of daycare centers that actually won't let their male employees change diapers.
Really?
Even though that's part of their job, there's this suspicion, especially around men. And I don't know if it's necessarily a stigma, but in my head it's a stigma, because I do work with kids and I am like a dude that people will automatically assume that I enjoy working with kids a little too much.
Yeah. It's that idea of that men are more, vicious, not vicious, but, like, I don't know.
Predatory?
Yeah, predatorial. That, just because it's a naked body, they think some men just can't control themselves, or I don't know.
Yeah, so that is definitely one thing, if you want to, like, have me on here. That is one concern that I have in this day and age, sort of, is that suspicion is that just because I'm male, I have that higher level of suspicion on me, and so I do have to be careful, especially I've never had to do a restraint or a hold, at least not an official one, but even in cases where I need to like specify that, okay, like a female counselor went into the bathroom and helped them, and we also have to have two employees in there at any time, so it's a big concern working with kids, because this attitude, this mentality that people like you are out there.
Now, two things.
Get the feminists on this, Caleb.
Two things that I wanted to bring up. There's one thing I read the other day where a fairly prominent airline had a policy that like a grown man couldn't fly with a child under the age of whatever, just because of exactly what we were saying. They assumed that all men were sort of predators, and they literally would not let them fly alone together. And they eventually had this huge public campaign, and the airline decided to get rid of the policy. There are still some that actually do that. The other thing I wanted to ask was, the fact that this stuff exists, like all these trainings exist, and I sort of agree that it is probably good overall, but is this sort of an example of legal action gone insane, where everyone is just so afraid of everything that we have to implement these policies, because, go back to the 50s and, you beating your kids and all that crazy shit. Do you think it's good? Obviously it's put in place for the protection of the people who need protection. But on the other hand, it just seems insane that we can't all have sort of a common sense approach to appreciate the fact that these counselors or these teachers or these public service workers are trying to do the best thing for the kids, and that they have to be restrained by all of these rules and have to, put themselves in these situations that they think they could lose their job, even though there's no intent to hurt anybody. There's no intent to do anything sexual or weird. And yet they still could be fired. They could still have their entire lives ruined because they accidentally didn't use the proper arm bar, or they didn't use the proper technique to do this. It sort of strikes me as somewhat ridiculous that we even have to have these conversations in the first place. Do you think we're moving from a place where people just didn't care that this stuff was going on and they were willing to sweep the bad behavior under the rug, and now this is a good thing that we're looking at it? Or do you think that people are just losing their minds and being way overly protective? They just want to put all these rules into place because they feel like saying it or talking about it is going to give them more control, even though it's really no different than it used to be. I don't know. What do you think about that?
Well, part of the training, the idea of it is to protect you from liability, is to make sure, I said that, so that you're doing things correctly. So it's a lot of at least the measures that we've taken to diffuse any potential litigation. So it's sort of, we do have to take protections to protect ourselves from like the public or parents that might get angry. But
the idea that nobody would have ever sued you before, like this is like a recent thing where people care so much, and they would be like, oh my God, like I feel like this would have happened. people would never sue you for doing this, and only now that there are people out there who want to sue you, that you have to now take all of these courses and take all of these precautions.
They're not bad, though, and it's honestly not that big of a hindrance to know these things. It is, and it's not strictly liability. There are definitely helpful components of this. Like, if you can figure out how to guide a child to a situation that's safer to them, so it's not that's safer to them without hurting them and doing it properly. Like, that's a good thing. Although there is something that I sort of did want to talk about that you sort of mentioned here, and it's a bit I think it's a bad idea in general, especially in a world that's getting so interconnected. Just to interconnect this broadcast, to teach your kids to be afraid of everything, and to just be afraid of strangers, to be afraid of the outside world. Because honestly, I'm not going to go into stranger danger. That's generally a good idea, is to not to creepy people you don't know. But the majority of strangers are not going to try to molest you in any way. Most of them don't. Hard. But actually,
to find someone who would molest you?
Yes.
The most cases of molestation, and I could go and to a bit on this, but I won't, because it's going to get dark. But a lot of cases are actually within the own family. So brushing things under the rug, that definitely used to happen. Especially in the cases of if it was someone else, if it was someone outside the family, then you're probably not going to brush it under the rug just like you would do. So in these cases where it's external, when it does get exposed, I think that's about normal. But what people tend to fail to realize is that it's not those external threats. It's
internal.
It's more dealing with the change in attitude. I think has been trying to accept the fact that within one's own family, things can be awry, and that's where the whole you mentioned like spanking your kids like in the 50s is the focus ultimately is not just to sue people, it is to protect the kids. And I think it can go a little overzealous in some regards, but at the moment what we're doing to sort of protect people isn't obstructive enough, or at least not some of the less ridiculous measures. I'd like to get a source on the airline thing. Because that's one of those things that sounds like it shows up on HuffPost, but doesn't actually happen.
I mean, another thing is, there's always going to be like kids that get, kidnapped and attacked. We're never going to be able to get rid of that completely. I mean, there's just going to be crazy people out there that do that stuff.
Doesn't all this shit? I mean, I sit here and listen to this. Doesn't it seem to you like it's a radical, pendulum swing in the wrong direction? It's just like obviously shit got pushed under the rug, and abuses and people got away with shit because people, like, society was ready to turn a blind eye, and now it's the opposite, where we're so politically correct, we're so concerned about everything being, just so that, like, bullshit people, like, these cases get brought up. It's just like, where nothing actually has happened, but somebody's ready to sue at a drop of a hat, and it feels like, I don't know.
Well, also, if you're like an 18 to 20-year-old guy, that's like prime time to get in trouble for like statutory rape. So you're better off just not having sex at all during that period of your life.
This is the one and only time you're going to preach abstinence, isn't it?
Well, I preach jacking off. I mean, they should be doing that. Become a master at that, and you will be your own, Dalai Lama.
Just to touch in again to.
Touch.
I just connected that. Anyways, the other thing you have to pay attention to is that in our day and age, our youthful generation, they don't just have access to each other informationally, they have access to the entire world.
Yeah.
So in a lot of cases where, yes, you may have only heard like one case growing up of any kind of pedophilia or of anything in your neighborhood, but that's just because at that time, all you were hearing about was your neighborhood. Whereas now you're hearing about the whole world. So I think that's a good point that you're making. Because one of the things,
seems like an overcorrection, though.
It's an overcorrection. I think it's also there's a lot of fear going into it. And in a lot of cases, I don't necessarily think it's an overcorrection. There are extreme measures. There are measures that are counterproductive. For instance, Amber Alerts. I remember reading somewhere, since this is live, I don't want to get into too much into it, but I hear they're problematic in their usage, and in a lot of cases, there are cases where they're used where they're being called, an Amber Alert is being issued for a child that's not missing. That doesn't, and it's, for instance, the mother takes the child without the father's permission, and
divorce.
And even then, it's not. So, like I said, I don't want to get too into it because I don't have that much information on hand.
There was one recently that just happened where like
the CDC called you, right?
But it's.
Well,
that was because he has a special strain of herpes they'd never seen before.
Let's talk about that just a quick second. There was somebody got kidnapped, and then I got a phone call. It was asking him if he was driving because the person was kidnapped in like a car or whatever, and if he had anyone under the age of 17 in his car. Like, is this just a trick to find out if I kidnapped somebody? It'd be brilliant if it was.
So this has affected you personally.
My brother was saying that they must have had a list, and they were just going down the list, and you were on it.
I'm on every list they have.
Yeah. Anyway, another thing.
I feel like we've derailed this comment.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
What we were talking about.
I just want to say I think you meant DCF, not the CDC, because
No,
he didn't give him Ebola. Did you give him Ebola?
No, I don't know what the fuck you're talking about.
Remember, it was just when we were recording 2 days ago.
Yeah, but it wasn't the CDC.
What was it?
Just some random fucking phone call.
Oh, you said it was the Center for Disease Control.
Oh, you know what it was? It absolutely fucking was, and I was so confused at the time. I remember that now.
What?
Yeah, Center for Disease Control.
They're like, do you have any? Yeah, I got called by for the CD. They're like, this is the Center for Disease Control. Do you have anybody under 18 in the house? We were recording drums. We were
in the house is different than in the car.
Yeah, but no, we were recording drums. I don't know why he said car. That's why I was confused. I thought that.
Didn't they ask you if you were driving? I'm pretty sure
they just didn't want him talking on the phone.
I don't know what the fuck this has to do with anything at this point. We've gone off the rails.
Amber Alert, I think that's right.
No, but it's true. They called me up and they're like, do you have anybody under 18? No? Okay, well, bye. I'm like, what the fuck was that?
Yeah. What if I said yes? They'd be like, can you pull over? Or like, where are you?
They did. No, they asked me if I was driving, so that if I was, that I should pull over. And then, do I have anybody under 18? And I'm like, no. I'm like, I'm doing something. Like, I can't.
Anyway, did we interrupt you? What were you saying?
Well,
I
don't have the slightest idea what sort of communicable disease they thought you might be giving to someone under the age of 18 during your drumming session. But leaving that aside,
herpes fun.
Leaving that aside, all I was really going for is just to sort of sum it up is what you're talking about is sort of a fear.
Yeah.
A culture of kind of fear around it.
Yeah.
I don't think it's as extreme as that, but it definitely should be geared more towards caution rather than fear. You should be able to, the difference between the 50s and now is in the 50s you would default to trust. Nowadays you default to distrust. Mm-hmm. So unless someone gave you a reason to mistrust them in the 50s, or unless, they were a different color skin than you thought they were pretty okay.
That was a big one.
Yeah, I dropped that one there. But no, unless they were, unless they were different, that was the only reason you would distrust them. An upstanding gentleman, even you don't know what he's doing, but you assume that he's right. Now you see just a man walking down the street, you don't want your kid near him by default.
I could have been a babysitter like 30, 40 years ago, but now I don't stand a chance.
You would have been a prenatal babysitter?
I would have been all kinds of babysitting.
Twinkle in his father's eye. I mean, I don't know how reputable these sources are. I was just looking for that story I was talking about before. I guess it was if it's an unaccompanied child sitting on a plane under the age of 12, they asked a guy to switch seats with a woman because they don't allow a man to sit next to an unaccompanied child under the age of 12. They forced him to switch seats with a woman because the woman is more
so they weren't traveling together.
No, they weren't traveling together. So
that's a little bit. That's kind of insulting to me as a man, where it's assumed that I'm more likely to be a pet, even if statistically I am.
Yeah.
Even though that's not necessarily true, I don't have the statistics. Yeah. But it's just kind of.
Well, you are white.
Yeah. But it's like all of a sudden, just because I'm a guy, like if I see a passed out girl, what am I gonna just have my way with her just because I'm a man?
No, it's because you're Nick Sabansky.
No, I mean, here's an interesting story my brother told me. There's a story about these Swedish tourists in India. Two girls, they fell asleep on the bus, all right? And when they woke up, nobody hurt them, nobody raped them, but everyone on the bus just jizzed on them before they got off, so they just woke up covered in jizz. Now, that's not that bad. That's pretty good for your skin, pretty good for,
protein.
High protein content.
I mean, I'm just saying the things those what India has been doing to women recently. They should have been pretty pleased.
Yeah. Well, so but that actually
CAT
brings
scan
up a good
machines
point.
are illegal in India, incidentally.
Huh?
What?
CAT scan machines are illegal in MRIs are illegal in India.
How is that related?
Yeah.
Because-
I'm wondering where your mind jumped
Yeah.
from jizz on sleeping passengers to MRI machines.
Well, because I was going to say that they're illegal because people use them for selective abortions to check their babies check their baby's identity. So if we're talking about India and if their babies
You mean like ultrasound? Is that what you're? You know,
yeah,
you're getting at?
ultrasound machines. Sorry, not
They
MRI.
love
That's a very
killing
large
women
thing.
and
But
doing
yeah,
things
there
to
are
women.
there's a booming trade in black market ultrasound machines.
That is insane.
In some areas of India. There are other parts are good, but that's just a deep-seated. I'm just saying. So if we're talking about India and women, there's special cases there. Although if that did happen in the United States, even if you spit on someone, that is assault.
I know.
Incidentally, so that would be assault on all their parts, even if it wasn't a sex crime, and it is very disturbing. So it probably would be.
And it is very much a sex crime, probably.
Yeah. Now, to bring this back a little bit, the fact that we know about this story in the first place, that you were able to reference this of dubious quality, but who knows? Sort of something that you were saying before, we used to only have to worry about what was happening in our neighborhoods, but now we have to worry about what's happening all over the world.
Yeah.
And so I think part of it, and the reason why we don't trust people, the default assumption is that people are untrustworthy, is that we see so much bad shit that comes from everywhere now. This shit was happening before. It's been going on probably at generally the same rate of incidents as it has been, but now we hear about it. And so it seems like psychologically people just shift towards this perspective of fear and danger, not because the situation in their neck of the woods is any worse than it used to be, but because they're confronted with all the other terrible things that are happening all over the world at all times. And it sort of has this psychological impact on them where they perceive the world to be much more dangerous than it is because they're confronted with all of the terrible things rather than only having to deal with the, terrible things that were happening in their neighborhood.
But any other crazy kid stories you want to tell us?
None that I can.
Okay.
There are because there's stuff that I can't say.
The records
Yeah.
are still
Well,
sealed until
absolutely.
2065.
Yeah. We have to wait for them to grow up.
It's not going to make it better.
That's where we landed on that, right? Once they grow up, it's fine.
once yeah. I know.
I know that's not where we
All right,
landed
we're
on
going to
it.
wrap this up. All right.